evening, everyone, and welcome to episode 110 of the Retrospectives podcast, Metal Gear Solid. My name is Patrick Arthur, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, James Turlings. James, Metal Gear Solid is a game that I've been interested in doing for this show for a very long time. We've done a lot of stealth games on this show. We've done Thief, we've done Splinter Cell, we've done Hitman, and it feels like in some ways this is a bit of a gap for this show because you and I have both played a lot of Metal Gear games in our lives. Let's get this ball rolling. Tell me what your history with Metal Gear Solid is. Which games have you played? Which games have you haven't? And were you looking forward to finally covering this one for the show?
Yeah, I mean, this one's been a long time coming. I've been a big fan of the series for a long time now, having played all of the mainline titles. I have only not finished The Phantom Pain, I think. When I was younger, I played 3 Subsistence to begin with, renting it from, the local Blockbuster when that was still a business that existed. And then eventually, once I moved out from my parents' home, I decided that I wanted to go through and play all of the series sequentially. So I played through 1, 2, 3, and 4 in order. Although the first time I played 1, I actually was unable to complete it because my disc 2 was scratched, and so I was only ever able to get through half of the game, 2 or 3 times before finally getting my hands on a digital copy once it was re-released in HD for the PlayStation 3. You've mostly played 3 and the 5, right?
Yeah, so I've played 3, 4, and 5. And for the record, I absolutely adore 3. I think number 4 is a game that expanded on 3's mechanics in interesting ways with a completely nonsensical story. And I think Metal Gear Solid 5 is one of the greatest stealth games ever made. The core mechanics of Metal Gear Solid 5 are simply incredible. But unfortunately, the story took a further nosedive. For
Uh,
me, 3 is still maybe not the pinnacle of the series, just because 5 is so far ahead of everything in terms of its fundamental gameplay mechanics. But 3 is definitely, for me, the union of story and gameplay. It's the peak in that regard. With number 1 and 2, I've actually played the beginning of both games, but dropped off both of them for different reasons. Number 2, I just kind of lost interest in when I was younger. And number 1, I think I had the demo disc on PC or anything or something. So I never got past the point where you are asked to check the back of your disc, and yeah, just played other games at that point.
Anti-piracy tools,
Well,
right?
it worked in this case. Um,
Yeah.
so I'm intimately familiar with Metal Gear Solid from 3 onwards. I've played those games all multiple times. I have been spoiled on most of the story elements of 1 and 2 just because my fascination with the series led me to doing a lot of like reading about them. So I knew all the major twists and turns going on, which is somewhat disappointing. But I mean, it is what it is. I'm not going to pretend to be surprised by things that I know were coming. Um, but I've always been interested in going back and actually giving this one a fair crack. I know a lot of people hold these games, particularly the first 2, in extremely high regard. And I wanted to see if their stealth chops actually stood up to the other stealth titles we've done and how they differed, what the approach of these earlier games was to stealth. Because I do think that the stealth in Metal Gear Solid 3, at least, does occupy a unique space compared to all the other games and is enjoyable in its own right because of it.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I'm actually really excited to talk about this one because I have some opinions after I played through, this time specifically that I hadn't held previously. So, and I think, my, like, the way I have this game remembered in my head is a bit different because of the fact that I played it 2 or 3 times without playing disc 2.
Hmm.
So, to me, most of my memories of this game are the first half, probably, before you get to about Sniper Wolf, which kind of leads to a very different overall feeling on the game than the one that I have this time.
Yeah, without
Um,
without getting too spoilery, this game is not what I expected. I'm actually it was a bit of a whiplash for me. Like, it was quite shocking what Metal Gear Solid 1 ended up being, and it was not the kind of game I was expecting at all.
For me, I've always been really fond of this first game. I think it's very short. And I've always enjoyed that about this one. It doesn't have too much wasted space, and I think, to me, the biggest criticisms I'm going to have are going to be, towards the elements that kind of undermine that, tightness of game that I think this game has.
Mm. So before we get into our discussion, just a quick note on who we are and what we do. James and I make up the Retrospectives podcast, and each and every 3 weeks we play through a classic or cult game of the past with the intent of evaluating it from a modern perspective. Critically, we're not here to do a nostalgic reflection upon the game or better understand the history and context in which it was produced. We're simply reviewing these games on a standard of how enjoyable they were to play compared side by side with the modern games that get released. In some sense, this is an unfair standard because, of course, video games of 20 to 30 years ago don't have access to all the same technology that the games of today's do. However, James and I have found over the over 100 episodes we've done that sometimes it's precisely the lack of technology or the lack of catering to mainstream demands of what a video game should be that can elevate these games and make them artistically better or at least as good as the games that are produced today. So it's a harsh standard of criticism, but it's ultimately a fair one if we want to look at video games as an artistic medium, and that's certainly what we want to do on this show. So before we get into the discussion, once again, one final thing. So James and I both played on a different emulator to the one we normally do. We normally play with EPSXE, but James recommended we try out DuckStation. Did you have any issues with this emulator this week, James?
No, none at all. We've previously used EPS XE and it's been fine. But there were some things about resetting up the controls every time I, opened it up every few months that was just really getting on my nerves. Where DuckStation just worked flawlessly. It has like a heap of graphical bells and whistles. Something that I really appreciated is that over the years, when we've done different games, we've needed different BIOS versions for the PS1, which normally results in me like trying to haphazardly figure out which one goes with which game. But you can kind of just point DuckStation at a folder full of them, and it'll pick the right one for you, which was my favorite part about it. It basically rivals Dolphin in terms of like on the fly video customization. Like you don't need to reboot or anything. You can run the game while you're tweaking the graphic settings. I played with it a lot while setting this up and got Metal Gear looking really nice. So I'll 100% be using this one moving forward, I think.
Yeah, I remember having some issues with Silent Hill 2 when we did that aeons ago, and Sly Cooper, I think, was throwing up some graphical glitches. So EPSXE hasn't been flawless. Very happy to move to DuckStation. Like you, I had zero issues with. So let's give a very, very brief overview of what Metal Gear Solid is for those who have never played it or heard of it. It is a pretty mainstream game, but it's always worth doing this. So Metal Gear Solid is an action slash adventure slash stealth game. It was first released in 1998 for the PlayStation 1. It did see a PC port shortly afterwards, and it's seen many, many re-releases, including a remake called Metal Gear Solid The Twin Snakes, which was basically Metal Gear Solid 1 built in the Metal Gear Solid 2 engine. So it ended up being kind of like, I don't know, like it's a very different game because it's got a lot of additions from Metal Gear Solid 2 technology wise. The game was developed by Konami and was directed, produced, and written by Hideo Kojima. It's the third title in the Metal Gear series, with the first two being 2D games, which released, I think it was for the Game Gear, like quite older consoles and the Super Nintendo. And this is the first, Metal Gear Solid is the first 3D entry in the franchise. The basic layout of the game is that it's a top-down game, so the camera is positioned isometrically above you, and the camera moves with you as you move. So it's not a fixed camera. I guess you would call it a fixed isometric camera. So as you move around, the camera moves horizontally above you, so you're always pretty close to the center of the action. There is a first-person view available when standing still, but you can't shoot from that first-person view. It's simply for scouting out the area ahead. So most of the time you're moving around in this fixed down isometric view. You take control of Snake, who has been brought out of retirement by Colonel Roy Campbell to solo infiltrate a black ops base after terrorists seize control of it. Your mission is to rescue two VIPs and ascertain whether or not they can launch nukes like they claim to be able to do so, and if they can, to stop them. But before too long, weird shit starts happening, and layers of secrets and betrayal start to slowly unravel and emerge as you go deeper and deeper into a web of conspiracy and lies to figure out what's going on and who all these people are, and why people keep randomly dying around you. Anything else you want to add to that basic setup, James? I want to keep this mostly spoiler free because I do think that the story of Metal Gear Solid is something that's better experienced. Like the nature of the narrative is that there are a lot of twists and turns, and it's going to be more enjoyable if you experience them yourself.
I agree. I think that just keeping it as the basic setup is for the best. It's not a very long game, but for its short runtime, I think the narrative actually there is a lot going on to it for that short
Half the
length.
game is
Which,
cutscenes, so I mean, there's a lot of
yeah,
story in this video game.
yeah. So where did you want to start then?
I think I want to start with the plot of this game. And I think the plot of this game is for the most part excellent. I think that the plot of
Mm.
Metal Gear Solid is the strongest part of this game by far, and it's excellently executed. So there are a lot of twists and turns as you, Snake, infiltrate this facility, and I think most of them are really well done. They're really compelling, and they're also well seeded throughout. Now, and this is coming from the perspective of someone who knew what twists and turns were coming. It was really fascinating playing this game and seeing how many hints they gave the player as to what was going on. But it does this clever thing where weird stuff like Psycho Mantis almost acts as a way to dispel your fears as to what's happening, because anything weird that happens, you can put that down to Psycho Mantis, right? You can put it down to other
Yeah.
weird phenomenon that are occurring in the game. And I think that the story, as it develops, as the character, you basically get a lot of these highlights of these enemy villains that get introduced, like just 1 or 2 seconds, and then you get to actually encounter them in the flesh later, and it's always enjoyable to do so. I think the story of this game is really good. I mean, I was hooked from start to finish, even though I knew what was coming. And I think that the way, every time you get hit with a new twist is very satisfying. So, big fan of the story of this game.
Yeah, in terms of the overall plot, it's quite simple in its setup, but I think the execution really sells it. Metal Gear does a really, really good job of setting your expectations and then kind of subverting them later on. And I think, like, to me, the thing that's always sold the series, like, narratively is just the, like, really high quality of the English voice
Hmm.
acting. To me, like, Metal Gear is the voice acting. Like, it's very campy, but also they play it very straight the entire time. There's lots of silliness in this game, but the main characters are always taking things deadly seriously, right? Like you are infiltrating a secret military base containing a weapons platform that can launch nuclear, missiles undetected to, parts of the globe. But this is very serious stuff, potentially dealing with like a World War III or end of the world scenario here. And the fact that the characters like really express things genuinely.
That's a really good way of putting it. The levity never undercuts the seriousness of the situation, and it never feels like the game is tonally wonky. Even though, as you says, it does have those little side things that are funny, and I think it does this because the characters have such firm philosophical convictions. So you have bits
Mm,
where people, are making fun of the way that Meryl walks, saying she has a sexy walk. Then there'll be a bit of banter between her and Snake, and then it will cut to her talking about her father and the reason she joined the military. And those two things aren't intermesh. It's not like you're getting constant little jokes in between. She's talking about her experiences with her father. They're kept separate. So you get, scenes with Snake flirting with a woman or whatever, but then it goes to the fact that basically, James, I'm agreeing with you. I think you put it really well. It takes itself seriously, and the game is better for it.
Even stuff like there's a lot of absurd elements in this game, right? Like one of the first boss fights is against Revolver Ocelot, one of the recurring villains of the series. And he is, a crack shot and is actually able to shoot bullets off walls and have them ricochet and hit you from behind, like with deadly accuracy. And there's all sorts of kind of like quirky things like this, like you fight a cyborg ninja, and all those kinds of quirky things mesh really well, I think, and give the game like a ton of personality. In terms of like the overall plot, I actually like got a lot more out of it this time, I think, than I had previously. Like there's a lot of, shades of grey in terms of the characters and the way it's sort of trying to portray being a soldier, towing that line between being a soldier fighting for your country because that's something you believe in, and being a soldier listening to orders from a potentially like, corrupt individual and kind of undermining like your original intentions of being a soldier, which I think is a long running theme in the series.
It's something that I think is actually done a lot better in the later games. Here, it doesn't really get fully into the weeds of it, I guess, because to me, there's nothing really justifying joining a terrorist organization that wants to
Yeah.
launch nukes, right? I had a hard time feeling sympathy for any of the terrorists when you killed them and they start talking about their it's like I was all sad on the battlefield. It's like there's a number of things you could have done that don't
Yeah.
involve trying to start a nuclear war. You do have options. The later games do a lot to talk about I guess, to attack the very concept of nationalism, which and Big Boss's vision of soldiers being able to choose who they fight for instead of just being a roll of the dice and used as pawns. In this game, it didn't work for me. All of those melodramatic scenes that you get when you're cradling the dead person in your arms, I was like almost laughing at how absurd they were.
I actually agree with you in that I think the weakest part of this kind of theme and this narrative does come from the actual terrorists themselves. But I think it does kind of shine and really work when we're talking about Snake and the people he's talking to on his codec, the people who are, for the most part of the game offering him support. And there's a bit of tension between,
Hmm.
him and his commanding officers at some points. And particularly with Naomi and her backstory, I thought they did that really well. I think that is where that kind of narrative shines the best. It's when you're talking to the monologuing villains, particularly Liquid, who
The
I
end,
think
the
has,
end monologue is just
yeah,
like just keeps going.
it just keeps going, and his like, it's very hard to understand his motivations other than him being a bit of an
It
asshole.
is so funny when he like cites Dawkins the selfish gene as which is like this biological theory that animals unconscious that we regress towards evolution and looking after your genes essentially, and he says this is the reason I'm doing it because of the selfish gene theory. I'm like, mate, your consciousness is clearly overriding the biological imperative but anyway, shit like that, he just keeps going and going.
Honestly, some of the like pseudoscience stuff works quite well, and then some of it, basically everything involving the main villain, is just like completely nonsensical. It's so funny.
It's funny. You'd think that so we've done police notes for this show a long time ago. I think it was episode 16 or something. And one of the things that we basically said was that he did a really good job with the hard science of police notes, but the
Yeah,
social stuff was less well done. And you can
it's
tell
like the opposite
no,
here.
it's exactly the same. Like I feel like the pseudoscience is actually done pretty well, and it's the moment it starts getting into grand philosophical theories that it kind of I
Interesting. I feel the opposite. I felt like Police Noughts did that kind of thing way better. Like the stuff about Fox Die was probably the most convincing,
what
and
about the
some of
card
the like
keys creating an
the
electromagnetic
card
field
keys was ridiculous.
to automatically open doors? I like how it wasn't just like a key that opened the door. It had to be it's sharing your
Like
electromagnetic field. It's like, why is that even necessary?
it was really funny.
Well, I have a question for you, James. How well do you think they solved the tension around Snake's character being a cold killer that didn't care about anyone, and then he actually does care about someone? Because I felt this was just not very good. Like when all
I
these
don't think it was
characters,
very
they're just
great
all
either.
accusing him of being a cold-blooded killer, and that's all he likes and all he likes doing. And I'm like, you don't get this impression from him at all. Like he's charismatically engaging with in conversations with a whole bunch of people, and he's saved the world from destruction twice before in, Metal Gear 1 and 2. Why are these people just telling him he now with Naomi kind of makes sense, kind of makes sense
Yeah.
in retrospect. But the other character, I don't know. I was like, I don't think Snake has to justify himself for saving someone. That seems absurd.
Yeah, I felt that that was probably like his character growth is not very well done, I don't think. I think the problem is that normally when you have this kind of character, you have them start in a place of weakness where they have major character flaws that they then overcome over the course of the
Hmm.
game. I don't actually think Snake changed like at all. I think maybe Otacon changed a bit, Naomi changed a bit.
Otacon's. I was gonna say. I think Otacon has the best arc of any character in this game, and he gets multiple scenes as his character develops, as he keeps helping Snake more and more over the course of the game. So I buy
Yeah.
into the fact that he's, a more courageous version of himself than when he started. But yeah, I just don't think Snake and starts the game being a bad person, and then he sees love and redemption. It's like I think he was the same person at the start, and they were just telling me he'd changed without actually showing it.
Mm. Yeah, I agree with that. I actually think his character's quite good, even. Naomi's probably my favorite character this playthrough. I think, particularly near the end in the cutscenes that I didn't remember, I think she sells it and her voice actor sells, like, her. There's like a tension in her character, right?
Hmm.
Like, she's got a motivation for revenge, but not completely. It's all a bit messy, and I think they sell it really well. Um, to step back a bit and talk a bit about the codec, because I feel like half of this game is spent in codec calls, where you've got like some kind of I don't know, is a codec like a thing in your ear that rings, and you
It's a
basically have
phone.
a yeah, it's basically a phone call.
It's a radio phone.
Yeah, I think the codec calls in this game actually really enjoyable for a few reasons. I think, like I said before, the voice acting is just like really good. I think the game's cutscenes get carried by the voice acting so hard, even when, sometimes the script is a bit, you know, off. I think some of the conversations go a lot longer than they need to.
Absolutely. I just want to say yes. It feels sometimes like they just repeat things as well. Like they just repeat.
That's the
It's
problem. It's
weird.
repetition. Yeah.
It's like, yeah, and I don't know if this was a translation issue or something, but sometimes it feels like, I felt like I was going crazy. It's like, didn't you just say that exact
Say
voice
that.
line? Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, there's some calls that are very long, but because there's no repeated information, I'm totally okay with them going for quite a while, particularly the ones near the end of the game, which have a lot of revelations in them.
Mm.
So I'm like happy to sit there and listen through them for ages. Lots of the ones at the start of the game, there are some funny ones that I'm happy to sit through, although those are usually shorter and sweeter side things. It's like I particularly found this issue with like Meryl and Sniper Wolf, that they had these philosophical conversations that involved a lot of repetition. If they had just been more succinct, it would have made the moment more touching, but it just kind of gets annoying after a
They need to be
while.
cut in half. I think this was also an issue with Psycho Mantis's death scene. Holy shit, it just kept
It
going.
just keeps
It just kept
going. Yeah.
going and going and going. I couldn't believe it. I was like, learn that brevity is the soul of wit, Kojima. What the fuck are you doing with your writing? Uh,
Yeah.
and honestly, it was generally a lot of the more melodramatic moments. Generally, I'm not saying that they were all a failure. I like, and I liked the tone of some of them. It just needed to be literally half the length. They didn't need to be 4.5 minutes long. It was 2 minutes, and we would have been able to move on. It would have been much better.
The initial conversation with Otacon, I felt was fairly justified when they spoke about Metal Gear for a while.
Yeah.
Um, compared to, I think it's like that scene in the bathroom with Meryl just went forever.
Even the Otacon scene,
Um,
I still think it goes too long. Like it's still we still get, repetition.
mm,
But yeah, the Meryl scene, it's like once again, the content of it is good. Like I like the idea of the scene, but it goes for 7 minutes.
yeah. In terms of the like less cutscene calls, like you can actually, because you have the phone and you can access it. and you can call different frequencies to discuss, to talk to the various characters. There is like so much attention to detail. You can basically call every character in every room of the game, and there's like a unique piece of dialogue with them, whether it be like the colonel giving you advice on, where to go next, or Master Miller telling you how to fight a certain enemy or use a certain item, Otacon giving you some backstory and that kind of thing. There's just like a lot of detail
Did
here.
you use this
Um,
a lot, James?
yeah, I have already like played the game through a few times, so I have like listened to every codec call like 3 or 4 times
Hmm.
previously. But I did still find myself like calling them a lot. Because there's heaps of unique dialogue, and some of it's quite good. I also think that the in dialogue portraits, they put a lot of effort into the
They look
animation of
great. Yeah.
these. They look really cool. Like they don't move a heap, but when they do move, it looks really good. There's like so many unique frames of animation there too that I wouldn't have expected. In fact, I would say that outside of the codec, the whole game has a lot of unique assets that get used for like half a second in the entire game, and it's a very it's something you don't see a lot these days, where I think, studios are more economically minded with their art assets, and try to, like, they made something, they're going to use it 3 or 4 times to get the most value out of it. This game is perfectly happy to show you something for half a second and then you never see it again. Like, even in the gameplay, in the very first room of the game, there's a puddle of water on the ground that if you step on it, it makes noise that guards hear. I don't think there's another puzzle. There's another puddle of water in the entire game. Stuff like that is everywhere in this game, but it kind of like makes it feel more alive and unique because of
So
it. There's so much stuff like that.
so James, with the codec calls, so I didn't end up using these very much just because I felt like they were very stilted, right? Like, in order to do these calls, you have to stop what you're doing, find the person you want to call them, have a short conversation, then you can call the next person, and you'd have to do this prior to, I guess, you have to do this like six times prior to moving on to the next area. I viewed these calls more as a gameplay hint system. Do you think they have value as story devices, or do you think that they're far worse than, say, audio logs as a way to give you additional non non-force exposition into these characters and the base?
I kind of prefer this format to audio logs. One issue I've always had with audio logs, and I know this is something that not everyone else like, I don't think everyone else has this problem. It's just a me thing.
Mm.
Is whenever I pick up an audio log, like I sit there and I listen to the entire thing and then I start playing the game again. I cannot
May as well
play
be a
the
codec
game
call.
and listen at the same
Right.
time. So this format with the extra visual like interactivity from the character faces gives me more than I get out of the audio logs, which I've never really enjoyed that much, honestly.
Hmm.
And it feels more natural to me, honestly. Like the whole audio log thing of like finding this guy's dying words in the toilet, it's kind of weird.
Yeah.
The phone call makes a bit more
Yeah,
sense.
whereas for me, I love audio logs. Like, shove them down my throat. I'll take all the audio logs I can buy.
The real deep throat.
Yeah, absolutely. Because they let me, I guess, play and listen to the story at the same time. And the reason I would say they're similar is that they're non-compulsory story, both these codec calls and audio logs.
Yep.
But I see what you're saying, and I do think that the advantage of the codec calls is that you probably develop more of a emotional relationship with these same characters that you keep speaking to.
Yeah.
Um, I still think that when I did use them, it was primarily as a hint system. When I had no idea what to do, which definitely happened a few times.
And there's lots of Easter eggs in this game, but one that I always found funny was if you call, there's a character Mei Ling who you can call to save your game. If you call her like 6 times in a row and like refuse to save each time, she eventually gets mad and like stops like responding and won't let you save the game anymore.
Oh, that's amazing.
Even when I wasn't using them, though, I think the fact that all this effort was here, like, kinda. like I'm aware that all that effort was there. It kind of like makes the game feel more immersive, even when I'm not like actively using that part of the game.
The other thing that stood out for me story wise, and maybe I've played too much Metal Gear Solid 5 recently, but holy shit, Snake actually has a personality in this game. Snake has charisma, Snake has beliefs, Snake flirts relentlessly with every woman in the game. It was delightful to experience because in Metal Gear Solid 5, I fucking hated that Snake seemed to communicate mostly in anime grunts. He doesn't even say anything for the first half of the game. It's very frustrating. So
I hate that
I
game because of
yeah,
that.
I really
Like I'll
liked
never finish. I don't think I'll ever finish that game. It's just not Metal Gear to me. Like even if the gameplay is good, like that's not why I liked the series.
the
So,
gameplay is really good. But yeah, with the first game, I mean with Metal Gear Solid 3, Naked Snake did have a personality, but it wasn't as good as what's this snake called again, James? Solid Snake?
Solid
Yeah, probably
Snake,
Solid Snake.
Metal Gear Naked.
Metal Gear Solid, yeah, Solid Snake. I feel like Solid Snake has the it is great, and I really enjoyed having a character that has a bit of riz to him. The problem is, of course, that you because of this, I just didn't buy all these people calling him a
I want
cold,
to
heartless
point
villain.
out that a few episodes ago we did Gabriel Knight, Sins of the Father,
Mhm.
which had a character that was also relentlessly flirty, but I hated that character while I love Solid Snake
I feel
by
like
comparison because Snake has like extra facets to his character than, Gabriel did.
Gabriel's flirting went over the line, I guess, whereas I don't feel Snake's does go over the
Yeah.
line, and that's certainly a gray area.
It's also
Like
not 90% of his
yeah,
dialogue.
it's a gray area, and I mean, obviously, people have different opinions on this, but I feel like he basically did the right thing, whereas Gabriel Knight regularly didn't and edged in her harassment. But maybe some people feel differently about it, and I'd be open to understanding that. And maybe I'm biased because I love David Hayter so much. Who knows?
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
do love Tim Curry, so I don't know.
Easily Kojima's biggest misstep is not bringing him back for the Phantom Pain. Just
Just
don't write your story that way.
mind-boggling. Like I
Yeah.
don't understand like why
Insane.
it is insane. There's zero justification for it. Did you have much more for the story, James?
I just want to sum up that I really like this game's plot. I think all the twists are great, and I think that the voice acting is stellar, and all the characters are just wonderful. There are some, bits of like overwrought dialogue, but it's not so much that it brings the whole thing down for me. I generally love the characters in this game.
Yeah, I'm a bit lower than you. Like, I think the plot's really good, but I do think that the dialogue could have done a lot of trimming. Definitely, and the melodramatic moments don't always sell it for me. That being said, the voice acting is so good that it kind of carries it above and
Oh, yeah.
beyond it. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm in agreement broadly with you. I think the story is good. I just think there were parts of it where I was like, Jesus Christ, this scene needs to end. This is ridiculous. But the main plot as a Tom Clancy story slash James Bond story, very good. Enjoyed it a lot.
Hmm. So we'll go quick music break now, and then we'll jump into the gameplay. So I really like the music in this game. I think it's just drilled into my head, having played the game so many times now.
Hmm.
But every single track is great. Has a good sense of tension, especially all the alert sounds and the boss themes. And I really, really like the music that plays during the melodramatic sections and the end credits.
Really, yeah. Not
Yeah.
I don't. That's like the music I don't really like. But maybe that was me taking exception to the tone as opposed to the music intrinsically. I agree with you, James. The music is phenomenal in this game, and maybe it's just as you said, it's so embedded into my head as a piece of you know history for video game music. But the music is just superb. I do think it does the really tense sneaking around music excellently. Where I think it kind of excels and is even better than anything I've ever heard is the music that plays when you get caught. Uh, it manages to have a sense of like urgency and action to it while also making you feel like you are the prey and they are the predator to encourage you to actually run away instead of go in all guns blazing. And I think that is very different from the other action music that's played in other stealth games that we've played. So I just wanted to highlight that as something special. But the sneaking around music is an excellent example of that kind of like and I think the thing that probably elevates it is the choirs. There's a lot of use of ominous choirs during these sneaking bits, which is quite an interesting choice.
Yeah, I love the choirs. That's kind of why I like the the melodramatic, where it's mostly just choir. So I was gonna pick Heaven, which is one of the early songs that plays when you're just entering the base. I think I think this song makes for a great like set 10 setup to entering Shadow Moses Island. And I really enjoy the first, few rooms of the game because of it. So this is Cavern. Alrighty, that was Kevin. Let's go to gameplay now. And I think this is going to be a bit of an interesting one because this game's gameplay is quite all over the place in some ways. But let's maybe start with the base stealth gameplay and then we can kind of move on to the rest, if not most of the game after that.
Yeah, I said earlier that this game is not what I expected to be. That doesn't apply to the first part of this game. The first part of this game is exactly what I expected to be. So, I guess we should explain a bit about what kind of stealth game Metal Gear Solid is. I guess I would describe it as light arcade stealth. So, you have guards walking around that have vision cones if you have your radar enabled, which I did. You have cameras that are also swinging back and forth, observing specific areas, also with vision cones. There is no way to alter your walking speed there to reduce noise or the speed at which you're moving really, as apart from tapping on a key. There's no, I guess, entering a stealth mode. There is a crawl, but you're either crawling around or you're running full tilt.
Yeah,
Uh,
although Snake, it's worth noting that Snake actually runs quite quietly compared to a lot of other games where running would make you noisy. The
yes,
only time you are noisy in this game is when you run on metal or, liquid floors or that kind of thing.
and it makes a noise, so you are aware that you're on noisy
Yeah,
surfaces.
yeah. Something that always made this series different to me in stealth is that you can be like running full pelt behind enemies and they won't turn around so long as you don't like hit them or, make noise by hitting some part of the environment. So there's a lot of like, hiding and waiting for guards to patrol and then as quickly as you can moving to the next, hidey hole. There's not a lot of like slow sneaking in this game. It's a lot of looking for patterns and then quickly and quietly taking the opportunity to move.
Yeah, a guard will be moving around. You just run to the next area, and then you're mostly good to go. That's really it. You can crawl into some vents temporarily to obscure cover, and there are I guess, nooks in the wall for you to lean against to give you additional cover.
You
But
you can tap against the walls
oh
that
yeah,
you are leaning up against, and that'll make a noise, and you can attract the guards to come investigate. Um, and there's a whole bunch of items that you can use to kind of like uh, maybe make a distraction. But in stealth games, I tend to find that items are kind of discouraged from being used as opposed to the traditional hide and move when it's your turn.
yeah. So in general, it's very, very, very simple. Um, Now James and I interestingly played this game a little differently to one another.
Yes.
So I played on normal mode, which has a radar. I played this way because I always thought it was one of the things that distinguished Metal Gear Solid 1 from Metal Gear Solid 3 for me, because Metal Gear Solid 3 has no radar. Instead, you have a variety of tools that holistically can emulate a radar. But I was like, yep, Metal Gear Solid is a radar game. But there's a hard mode for Metal Gear Solid 1, which disables the radar. And although my stealth experience was, for the most part, incredibly simple and easy, I think that yours was a bit harder with the lack of the radar, James.
Yeah, so I played on hard without the radar, and it feels like a completely different game, I have to say, with the radar turned off, because you have a fairly limited viewport. It's basically top down. So if you can't see an enemy on the minimap or radar, really need to use a bunch of different tools to get information, because enemies, like if they're on your screen, there's enough sightline for them to see you. So you can press triangle to go into first person and look around, or you can lean up against walls and then the camera will kind of tilt down to a like third person view. And then crawling, you can also like get a bit of a view in first person as well. I had to, in the first couple of rooms of the game, which honestly were probably the hardest in the whole game for me, I had to do a lot of, hugging walls and quickly checking around corners and memorizing guard patterns to actually get to inside the base. Because when you can't see, very far either side of you, it becomes much more difficult to play the game. Honestly, I think the game was way more enjoyable playing this way than with the radar. Like, it actually makes you use like every tool you have available to you in order to get through. So I'm really glad I did it. The only issue maybe was that Vulcan Raven's boss fight was like 20 times harder this way, to the point of a bit of frustration. But the regular stealth gameplay I think was massively improved without the radar.
Yeah, so when I was, the first few areas when I was doing this, I, failed a couple of times. So it wasn't like so easy that I was just going through it with my eyes closed, but I was like, okay, I think I've got the hang of this now. I can't wait to see what this game has in store for me, how they're going to escalate the challenge in interesting ways. Um, it doesn't escalate. In fact, it disappears, the
Yeah,
stealth gameplay in this game. I would say that, as James said, the first couple of rooms is as hard as it gets. There are a couple of areas which have a similar level of difficulty, but honestly, I don't even think that's true. Like, the tank warehouse has two guards. The area before the offices has two guards in this big empty space.
that area before Psychomantis where there's that like it's like the room with the little
All the doors on either side, the six doors.
that room was so hard without a radar, because the guard is normally at the bottom of the room where you can't see.
Yeah.
And to actually see where he is, you have to enter the room and then go into first person
Yeah,
and
and
then quickly get on the floor. And then, like, he patrols in a circle around the whole room. So you're like, yeah, it's a lot harder when you can't see his cone on your radar.
yeah, the room angling down would also be harder for you, whereas that made it trivial for me because you can't be
Yeah.
seen by the guards on the upper level when you go down the ramp to the lower level most of the time. Like super easy. Like
Even if you look in first person and you say, okay, the guard is over there and he's looking this way, the second you go back into third person, the information you have starts to become inaccurate
out of date.
immediately.
Yeah.
Yeah, like very quickly. So you have to constantly like double check where he is. Gets a bit easier when you get the box.
Yeah, I can see why that would be more challenging. For me, it never really developed in difficulty, which I was quite disappointed by. And then at the second half of the game, it just disappeared. There was
Yeah.
no more stealth gameplay. It was out the window. Like I said, this is the part of the game which I would say shocked me. Like, I thought this game was a stealth game. I thought Metal Gear Solid was a stealth game. After playing this, I would say it's an action game with stealth elements, like it or stealth light. Like Sly Cooper is more of a stealth game than Metal Gear Solid, in my opinion. I
Maybe.
genuinely believe that. Like that game has more consistent stealth elements from start to finish than Metal Gear
I
Solid.
do think that, and maybe you didn't have this experience with the radar, but like the stealth that was here was good. Like I liked every single stealth room in
I
the
mean,
game.
like it. It's too. I can't even say that really. Like it was fine, but there was so little of it. Like it's
Yeah.
like insubstantial. Like there's not much stealth gameplay in this game. Like you can name the 5 rooms that have stealth in them. And the thing and we'll get into this more later, but there was an opportunity with the amount of backtracking you do to really ramp this up. Have an easier version when you first get to an area, and then have a second, much harder
They
version.
did do that.
They did do that with a little bit, but
Um, I can see where you're coming from. Like for me, the backtracking rooms were 10 times harder than they were originally.
right, I got through them all first try. Like they were. It was all completely trivial.
The room that has all of the like the room that has the sniper in it, that it's like a grid with the trap doors. That room is so hard when there's guards and you can't see, like, because all of the blocks block your line of sight,
Mhm,
you don't know where the guards are without like hugging a wall and checking around the corner. And
right.
even then you can only see one of them at a time, so you don't know where the other two are. It was
Generally,
like
if you just follow behind someone, you're pretty safe though. Like you can just pick a guard and follow them, and as long as you're right on the heel, the other ones should be on different patrol routes, right?
yeah, they had a lot of crisscrossing sight lines at
Okay.
points. Yeah, I tried that a couple of times and then I
It does hard
eventually
mode add additional guards?
I don't know. It does limit the amount of rations you have to 2, and it does reduce the amount of max HP that you get from killing bosses.
Hmm.
So you do have to beat bosses like with a
Without
lot less
just tanking
health.
through it, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay,
Um
that makes sense. But yeah, I just found the stealth in this game completely trivial. I guess if I were to play, but it's kind of annoying just because everything you sound about the removal of a radar does seem like it leads to a better stealth experience because you're forced to
honestly,
use all these tools.
I think you should play the first like 3 rooms of the game without the radar, because that's like, there's not much more stealth in the game. Like that's the whole stealth section.
Yeah, waste of time. I'll pass. But I see what you're saying, and I can see why it would lead to a better experience. If we ever do Metal Gear Solid 2, might try that on hard mode
Mm.
as an alternative to pissing around with this. Yeah, I thought that the stealth in this game overall wasn't bad, but it was so insubstantial as to be not good, and I was very disappointed that they didn't develop on it in a more interesting way and create actually challenging rooms.
Yeah, whereas my opinion is that I think it's all excellent, and I, think every room is like brilliantly designed with some really good patterns, really good, places for you to hide and get information. It's so funny. I didn't have this opinion like last time I played, but this time it's like very obvious that the game was designed to be played both ways. It's awesome.
Okay, so that's the stealth. And we'll get more into what replaces stealth later. But before we do, let's talk a little bit about the combat. Because this game does have a combat system, and I'd say that it's important to explain the basics of how combat works in this game, because it is also worked into a lot of the boss fights.
Snake, remember the basics of CQC.
Yeah, unfortunately, no Metal Gear Solid 3 CQC. It's a lot simpler
Yeah.
here. But so you run around, and whatever direction you're pointing when you're running around, you'll shoot in that direction. The game does have auto aim, so if you're shooting near an enemy and aren't actively aiming it, like holding down a direction, it will auto correct if you're aiming close enough to an enemy to automatically shoot them.
Did it?
Or at
Does it
least
really?
absolutely, yeah. You have to be aiming kind of close to them, and you have to be, I guess, finger almost has to be off the controls, I guess, because your input will override it, but the game will auto aim if you're for you. Definitely, I noticed this in the very first fight where you and Meryl are defending against waves of enemies.
I found that room very hard
Yeah,
because
I
I
used auto
found it.
aim.
Yeah, I couldn't hit people. I didn't notice it had. So do you have to like do something specifically to make it
No,
work?
you'll find that if you kind of like run up to an enemy and start shooting, it will. If you're shooting close to them, it will auto aim to them. It
I
doesn't
felt
necessarily do it automatic. Like it might not be the first bullet, but it definitely does it. Because yeah, I if you're not holding on anything, it will eventually lock onto the enemy.
I could not get that ever working. I basically always had to hold the button, line up the shot, and then shoot.
Well,
Hmm.
there is some kind of auto aim definitely here. Maybe it's only on normal, but trust me, I'd be if I was somehow getting auto aim and not realizing it. I don't think that's even possible. So there's a
Right.
little bit of auto aim here, but it tends to not be useful because it's a bit slow in activating. So you can't just shoot in that general direction, a la Doom, and expect enemies to die. In general, you can't rely on it in things like the boss fights, though. I would describe a lot of the boss fights where you have to shoot as you run around like mad and then you stop for the shortest possible time, shoot some bullets, and then keep moving.
Yep.
You can also do a thing where you kind of use your forward movement as an opportunity to shoot at the boss or enemies so that you don't have to stop moving. You kind of like turn around and run at them shooting before swerving in another direction. Um, how did you feel about this basic game gun shooting gameplay? We'll talk about the specifics of boss fights in a second, but do you think that the basic combat gameplay works here, James?
I think it's a bit underbaked, honestly. It's probably my least favorite part of the game is the shooting and the controls. I'm a bit forgiving of this because this is mostly, well, this is sold as a stealth game, I guess. So I normally expect in these stealth games that you're shooting to feel a bit poor. I never noticed that there was auto aim, and I was missing shots all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I think the worst parts of the game were the ones where you were forced into fighting, and that happened quite a few times, which felt terrible because I think the shooting doesn't control very well, to be honest. Boss fights were okay because you could mostly like use melee or some other auto lock on weapon, with the only real gunfight being against Revolver Ocelot at the beginning. But the nature of that was it's a one-on-one, you can dodge his bullets. Where, funnily enough, like that guy's like a crack shot. His bullets are very dodgeable, whereas normal enemies with machine guns, I found just like were impossible to dodge their fire, especially when you had to deal with multiple. Whenever I had to deal with like two or three enemies at a time, I was really hating my life. I think it's not a game designed for that kind of combat. It feels very bad when you have to do it. And I actually think, like, to expand on that, I think the controls in general feel more unresponsive than I remembered, specifically when you're like leaning up against walls or trying to like aim with certain weapons. It feels a bit jank in some places.
Yeah, the way this would be done today, there's a number of ways it could be done. One would be as a twin stick shooter. I don't think that would suit this game, but it is
No.
verging on arcadey enough that maybe it would work. The far more common one would be you'd have an aim button and then you'd have a fire button, either with like a laser or auto target. So you would hold down a button, it would auto target an enemy. But I think better would be like you aim, a laser appears, you can swing the laser around and choose when to shoot. This, you kind of have to line yourself up with whatever direction you happen to be moving, which makes the whole thing feel a bit awkward. You kind of have to start running at an enemy to start shooting them, and then if you're getting shot in the back, you need to awkwardly swing around. It doesn't feel very good. I can see with enough time you'd probably be able to master this kind of combat system, but for me, I never found it a lot of fun. The other boss fight I would shout out is where I think this actually worked decently well was the Psycho Mantis fight. I think that that fight has the right balance of evasion and targeting, where you kind of have to find moments in between dodging projectiles to shoot at him, and
Yep.
even the bit where he disappears and reappears, you have to find the right moment to react and shoot him before he shoots a projectile at you. I think that that fight was actually a good execution of that system. It took me a couple of tries, but I was very satisfied when I got through it in one piece.
Yeah, I'd say my favorite bosses from that kind of design are Ocelot, Psychomantis, Rex itself. I actually thought was quite satisfying to fight once you got the hang of it. It did feel a bit janky at first, but once you understood how to deal with the missiles, it
I
got a
mean,
lot better.
I spammed it with chaff grenades. I don't know if it's possible to win that fight without doing that.
Oh, I didn't use a single grenade.
Okay, you're better at the game than I am, James, because I was
What
struggling
does the
with dodging it.
grenades do?
It stops it shooting its missile.
Right. Okay.
Yeah,
So the missiles like have a huge damage box.
yeah.
The thing is that it can't fire the missiles close to itself.
Hmm.
So normally what it does is it does a missile phase and then it'll either shoot its laser or its machine gun. So it'll shoot its machine gun and then right as it starts shooting the missile, you run underneath Rex and the missiles land nowhere near you and then you run out, sting a missile and repeat.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I
Um.
actually forgot to even try to use the grenades, and then I remembered after and felt stupid. But I'm kind of glad that like I figured out how to dodge it.
Yeah. The other fight that I quite liked was the melee fight against Grey Fox.
Yeah, that was
Um.
really good.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I thought that
it's
was.
hard.
It's funny. I have a lot of people saying that. I found it quite easy.
Oh, it took me like an hour. That was easily
Oh
the
my
hardest
god!
fight. Yeah.
But like the attacks that he does are very predictable. So you just let him do the attack, he misses you, and then you can follow up with a 3 hit combo, rinse and repeat. I beat him my first try. I found it
Your
very easy.
first try, really? I
Yeah.
just kept dying to him over and over.
Well, I mean, once I figured out I couldn't shoot him, yeah, I
He does like two hit you on phase 2 and 3.
keep in mind I had a lot of rations, so I did chug through a few of them. But the like the final phase,
Yeah, I
you
guess I
kind of
only had like two.
the final phase you just run away from him. Tell he does like a slow punch, and then you punish him, and you just do that over and over
A
again.
slow punch? He like dashes after you with his sword in phase 3. I
I
wonder
know
if
about
it's different.
I know about the final phase where he teleports, so he'll like juke you out,
Yeah,
but you can bait him into doing that. So and then he does a slow punch, take him out. I found that
a
fight.
slow punch. Man, I didn't think you could hit him once he started running. Like, if you didn't find him in time, I thought you were screwed.
No, if you don't
Basic,
fight him in time, he comes to you,
yeah, he comes to
and
you
then
and
you
then he
can
does
dodge
this
that attack.
giant slash attack
Yeah,
that hits
you
you.
just run past it. It's uh
Yeah, he
he
dashes
hit
to you.
okay, he hit me with it once, and then after that, because I didn't even try and find him.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
I had to cheese him with chaff grenades, which stun him.
oh, yeah,
Like, I
I
used
did.
like 15 on him. Like, I had to do that.
Okay, I just thought that his attacks were dodgeable, basically. But I mean, I enjoyed the fight. Like it was fun. I did go through 4 or 5 rations or 3 rations, whatever you had, plus the one
Five
that was in the room.
rations. I got
Or
like one.
or whatever one, because I had max rations, and I think there's also a ration in the room, so I
Yeah.
went through them. So, but yeah, it was not too bad. But yeah, I liked that fight. I thought that the sniper wolf fight was fucking awful. I hated both of them. I thought they were uninspired and uninteresting.
How did you do them?
So I basically lay in place and shot her.
Yep. You can use the missiles as well.
Okay, I just lay in place with the sniper rifle. Took some of that thing. It took me a while to figure out like what to do about the shaking of my hands, but I had some of that stuff diazepam or whatever it is.
Yeah, I ran
But
out
then,
like halfway through the fight, so I just had to deal with shooting.
oh my god, that sounds. So the thing is, actually getting a beat on her is so fucking annoying because every time she shoots you, your crosshair gets knocked to the
Shakes.
side, so you have to
Yeah, one of my
slowly.
criticisms of the controls is that the turn speed, if basically every aim reticule, and even just when you're standing still and rotating takes so long.
Mm.
Turn speed's just so slow in this game. It's very frustrating. Even like at the end of the game in the chase sequence, I found the turret moved so slowly.
Yeah, so
Um,
I didn't like the sniper fights, and you know the sniper fights in the later games are just so much better. Like Metal Gear Solid 3 has one of the best boss fights of all time. I think
I will
Metal
be
Gear.
skipping that fight.
So
I will
what?
be
Why,
sniping that guy early.
dude? That
It
fight's
takes
the
so
best,
long. It's so tedious.
dude. I love it. Like it's
It's like cool
genuinely
conceptually. Like the best thing
it's
about
cool
it
in
is the fact,
actuality, dude.
yeah, it's great because you can like put your game speed ahead and then he dies.
No, you can
That's
identify him
the best part
with
of
the
the fight.
glint of it off his rifle. Then you get to slowly figure out how to sneak up behind him. It's so good.
Yeah, and go through two loading screens every time.
Wow, it's like you hate stealth gameplay or something. I love that fight so much. Metal Gear Solid 4's has a sniper thing, which is a homage to this one, which I think is better. I just hated, and I love sniping. I do sniping in every multiplayer game
I didn't
ever,
find
but
it too bad, honestly. I remember like the first time I did the Hind D fight, I struggled with it a lot, but I found it pretty easy this time.
boring. Oh my god, you just shoot
Yeah,
it, then go and cover. It's just rinse and repeat.
yeah, that's the problem I had. I think is I have to be patient, and I hate being patient.
Yeah, you just wait on you just take it in turns shooting. That was a terrible boss fight.
Definitely, the worst part of the game is the bits in the towers.
Oh boy, so bad.
Yeah. I think honestly, in my head, and I mentioned this earlier, I'm very fond of this game because I didn't have disc 2. So I think this game gets a lot worse once like the second Meryl gets shot by Sniper Wolf, I think the game kind of like I
Hmm.
think it starts going downhill a bit in
Yeah,
terms of
let's talk
gameplay.
about backtracking games. Jesus Christ. What the
Yeah,
fuck were they thinking? It is terrible.
so I'm of the opinion that a game should like aim to be as short or as long as it needs to be and no more or no less. I feel like there's a lot of people out there and I actually today went back and read old reviews like from, the day that this game released and so many of the reviewers were like this game is too short. This game would be great if it was longer and I'm like you idiots are why these backtracking sections exist. Like this is a very tight, short game that is really marred by these two particular sections that only exist to pad out the length of the game because reviewers will get whiny or something. I
It's
just don't.
kind of three sections as well. So the first one is when you need to go get the sniper rifle.
Yeah,
The second one is the torture scene where you have to wake up in the torture chamber and make your way back, and this is like immediately after getting the sniper rifle, and then finally it's getting the three keys, which is just with how long it takes to return to that area, it is so frustrating. And the thing
actually
is,
found the first two not that bad because they force you to go through the best stealth rooms, so it was like sort of fun to do them again. Like, no, I didn't love it. And I think the game would be way better if there was just a sniper rifle in the wolf cave or something. That scene at the end, though, where you have to go back and forth to get the key, is like, holy shit, why?
it's kind of so the thing that really accentuated this for me is that it really felt to me like the game was building up to like a proper stealth labyrinth. Like it's like, okay, we've done the
Yeah,
earlier stealth bits. Now we're going to get a bit where it's really going to throw a stealth gauntlet at me that I have to try and make my way through. With lots of hidey holes to crawl through and time exiting and so on and so forth. And it just never materializes. You just kind of go through these
yeah.
derelict halls where there's nothing running up and down these. It's like, what happened? Like, did they run out of budget? Like what happened to the last half of this game? Where's all the gameplay? Because there's really not much. It's got all these gimmicky set pieces, like the stuff where you're rappelling down the wall and the bit where you're running up the endless staircase. But it's not building
Fuck the
on.
staircases.
It's not actually building on the fundamental gameplay that was established in the earlier parts of the games. It just keeps throwing different bits at you, and Listen, I've played the later Metal Gear Solid games and they have their problems. Like Metal Gear Solid 4 is very bloated, but the fundamental gameplay in 3, 4 and 5 is rock solid and they build on it over the course of the game. Like it's interesting and in-depth and gets more difficult as the game goes on in all three games. Metal Gear Solid 1's gameplay just it vanishes into mist and it's replaced with these fun set pieces. Playing this game, James, I saw the seeds of games like Uncharted and The Last of Us, where they focused on spectacle more than fundamental gameplay. And I was shocked and surprised because I never thought of Metal Gear Solid as being a series like that. But
You
maybe
played
back
4 and you never really thought of it.
no, Metal Gear Solid 4 has such good gameplay. Like it's surrounded with this terrible story in my opinion, but the gameplay in that game is even better than 3's. Like it's really really good.
It's interesting to me. People always like memed on 4 for it having too much cutscene to gameplay ratio,
Mhm.
and it like blew my mind because 1 is like the same thing.
When you said
Ex-
that to me, I didn't believe you. I was like, there's no way it can be as bad as 4, but
it's
no, it's
this. It's
worse
not.
than 4.
It's not. It's not different at all. It's like the series has kind of always been this way. Like
Uh, yeah, I just feel like the gameplay in Metal Gear Solid 4, even though there's not heaps of it, is really, really, really good.
I
Yes.
still, yeah, I guess I still feel that way about 1. Like I
Okay.
really like all of the stealth rooms in this game because I think they're
That's not
all,
all the gameplay though. Like I
yeah.
get it, but there's like 5 stealth rooms in the game. And that's not like there are actually 5. Like it's 5.
Doesn't bother me so much because I like most of the boss fights. I think that basically everything between Sniper Wolf, shooting Meryl, and fighting the Hind D, I just hate.
Hmm.
I think is so much tedious bullshit. And then everything after that is fine until you get to Rex, and then everything after putting the keys in is great again. It just there's like a bunch of sections that really drag the game down for me this time when I was playing. Whereas I think, honestly, I think that everything up until and including Psychomantis is basically perfect. Like, I have basically no criticism of the game up until that point, and then after it's like all criticism.
And for me, I mean, I agree that it's a significant drop off in quality, but even up to that point, I was just disappointed at I guess, the lack of challenge. I guess, the lack of which it didn't really
Should have
do
played on
anything.
hard.
Sorry?
Should have
Yeah,
played on hard, I
well,
think.
I don't want to play the game again at this stage, but I'll tell you
Yeah.
that much. But maybe later games, I just need to play it on hard. I just thought this was the game that had radar stealth. I mean, when they originally made the game, there was no hard mode, so that was the thing that eventually tipped me over to doing normal.
Yeah.
But clearly, I'm too good for this game, James.
Yeah, probably. I mean, it's a very like cinematic game at the end of the day.
Yeah.
It's not like a super challenging title, and I think that's fine. It's just, you kind of have to know what you're getting into with this one. It's a lot of story and a lot of, set piece moments.
Hmm. I did have one more gameplay note, James, and maybe this was less relevant for you because you knew what to do. I found that a lot of the time this game had somewhat of a puzzle element to it, where in order to progress, you had to figure out what to do, and it wasn't always 100% clear what to do. Did you ever run into one of these situations, or was it always pretty straightforward for you?
I played this game for the first time quite a while ago, so I can't remember how I felt back then. Can you give me an example?
Well, one was in order to see the lasers, you have to smoke a cigarette. And that's one that I only knew because you told me about it. I would not have thought of that. I would not have thought of smoking a cigarette to reveal the lasers. I'm assuming there's like a codec call you can do to speak to someone about it.
Yeah, I didn't actually bother with the cigarettes this time. I just used the thermal goggles, which
So it
show.
turns out you cannot get the thermal goggles if you don't collect them at a specific time. That door closes and you can only get them later.
Oh,
So
yeah, it's
the
right at the
only
start of the game.
yeah, and the
Yeah.
door closes behind like a level 3 door or something. So you have to get them, and if you don't, I think smoking the cigarette is the only way to reveal the laser patterns.
How did you get into the base?
Well, I went by the upper path because that's how I always did it when I had the demo on my PC.
Yeah, that's the path that has them.
Yeah, I didn't collect them for whatever reason. I must have
Oh,
missed them, or but yeah, I didn't have the thermal goggles. So, uh, and I think that the intended way to solve some of these puzzles is to basically, I would say, the location of the sniper rifle is maybe one of those things, James. Like you're told that you need to get a sniper rifle, but you may not know exactly where it is. And I know that you can do a codec call to find out where it is, as opposed to just wandering around aimlessly.
I just assumed that it would be in the room that had the highest card key number on it.
Yeah, those are just a couple of examples of like not knowing exactly what it is you need to do or what it is you need to use in order to progress, and you're having to either mess around with the options at your disposal or make codec calls. For me, it was okay. Like, I don't mind this. I think that the codec call hint systems are a good way to do it. I'm not really sure how I feel about this. I think that it felt a bit odd for me because the game is presenting itself as kind of linear, but there are items that you can get that are kind of slightly off the path that are either necessary or make things far easier in order to progress.
Hmm.
Uh, I think it's mostly fine. And the one or two times I had trouble, it was not hard to look up a walkthrough instead of doing, 6 codec calls. So I think it's a fine feature, but I
That's
don't love it.
interesting. Yeah, I guess I never really had that experience this time just because I knew about everything. Like,
Hmm.
I just knew things ahead of time when playing. I didn't re- don't re- like. I kind of like it. It doesn't quite have the reactivity that three does. That game's kind of next level in that regard. But the like cigarette thing to me was always this like this cool bit of attention to detail that they added in the game, and like stuff like planting C4 on the backs of guards or the box. All of that kind of stuff kind of makes the game feel a bit more alive to me. There's that one random guard like outside at the start of the game that can like follow your footprints in the snow to find where you are, and there's like not a single guard in the rest of the game that can do that other than that one guy. It's really funny. I think there's a lot of little attention to detail stuff, and I think the puzzle elements kind of fall in line with what it was trying to do there.
I think the other thing that threw me off, James, is that there's these VR missions you can do before the main game. I don't know if you did them at all.
Yeah, I did them again.
Yeah, but it teaches you all of these, like all the different elements of stealth.
There's
Yeah,
like more stealth in the VR missions than
I
there is in the
know, I
game.
know.
Yeah.
So I was like, I'm all ready for my Metal Gear Solid stealth experience, and to some degree, I feel bad almost judging it as a stealth game, but everyone's always told me it's a stealth game. Like it's so fucking confusing
What
that
is a
I've never.
stealth game?
It's weird that I've just never come across this in any discussions of Metal Gear Solid that this is the kind of game it is. It's kind of yeah, it's very it's surprising to me. I just kept waiting for the game to be a stealth game again.
There was that one bit in the foundry area. If the ice area and the fire area had been two rooms, like left and right of Rex's room, like the end of the game would have been like 10 times better,
Yeah,
you know?
imagine like instead of just going to the hot room and the ice room, there was a specific location you needed to reach at the end of a gauntlet of whatever on either side. So on the ice side, it could be cameras and wolves or whatever. On the fire side,
Yeah.
a bunch of guards, and you have to sneak through them and then sneak back in both directions. Fantastic. It feels like they ran out of money for this game, honestly. I don't know what actually happened, but the second half of this game is like a nosedive in terms of what seems to be promised in those earlier sections.
Yeah, it does really like they did not reuse assets enough in this game. It's
Yeah.
really funny.
Whereas something like Metal Gear Solid 3, they introduce the camouflage system, and then over the course of the game, you find 40 camouflages and 35 face paints.
Mm.
And that thing is all the way through. Or, they've got the guards with the radios, and you can shoot the radios, and that's a thing all the way through. Like, it feels like a very different philosophy. Metal Gear Solid 1 feels like a tech demo in a lot of ways, I gotta say. And maybe to some degree it was. I know that a lot of this technology was cutting edge when it released.
I mean, I feel like for the PS1, this game's like kind of insane still. Like compared to the other, like compare this game to like Ape Escape and or something. It's like this
Wow,
game
all
is
the Ape
like
Escape fans going mad.
I don't know. I think for
Ape
its
Escape
time,
had
this
had a lot of tech, to be fair. Ape Escape was a
yeah.
tech demo for the control, so that's probably the worst example you could have come up with.
Can we? I do want to mention the visuals of this game. I actually think this game still looks really nice.
Mm,
There's like a lot of attention to
mm.
detail. You really don't like
Uh,
it?
I'm just saying, James. I don't know if you can say Max Payne looks fucking terrible and then say this game looks nice. Those are inconsistent statements, I think.
Really think so? I
I
think this game
absolutely
looks
think
way
so.
better than that game did.
That's so weird. I mean, they're both the environments are so similar and everything. Man, I think that there is a particular aesthetic and art style here, absolutely, but
I think
it
there's
is
an attention to
very
detail in
it's
everything
very
that is
low res
missing in that
3D models,
game.
man. Like I don't know. I can understand why people find this PS1 aesthetic charming, and I'm glad that you enjoy it. But for me, it's this early era of 3D is just not very visually appealing, and I think that a lot of the models just look absolutely ridiculous with how low res they are.
Really, I always thought the character models looked quite good compared to some of the other PS1 ones. There's enough, facial structure suggested by the visuals without it laying everything bare. It kind of reminds me of looking at like pixel art games where you don't see everything, but that kind of like adds to it.
Man, you need to look at Max Payne 1's visuals because everything you're saying about Metal Gear Solid can equally be said about that game. Like
I don't
it's
think so. I'm
uh,
looking at it now. I think the environments are very bare in that game. I think there is way more attention to detail here, to be
yeah.
honest.
All right. Well, I
Um,
have to agree to disagree on that. And I would say that it's nowhere clearer than in those codec calls because the codec calls you have these masterfully illustrated character portraits and then it cuts to the 3D polys and I think it just looks pretty awful. And I mean, I know and like I said, I know people like this aesthetic and I think that the low res remake of Bloodborne that someone made, the PlayStation 1 remake, is fucking phenomenal at evoking this kind of era of aesthetics. It's just not one that I enjoy. So if you enjoy it, good for you. But yeah, I do not fuck with this aesthetic at all. Shall we cut to my music break, the alert music, before we move on to final impressions?
yeah, let's do that because this is basically like the main theme of the game anyway. So yeah, this is the theme encounter that plays when you get spotted. Alrighty, let's go to final impressions then, Patrick. Do you want to take us away? I think we're going to be a bit divided on this.
So this is where I move into a hot take. I do not recommend Metal Gear Solid 1. This really surprised me. I thought the lowest I could possibly be on this game would be like a kind of recommend, like I'd be half and half. But after thinking about it, I don't think Metal Gear Solid 1 is a very enjoyable game. I think the plot is really good. I think some of the voice acting is good, but the unnecessary melodrama, the way cutscenes go on forever, the repetitiveness of the dialogue, means that with the story, even though it has a really good part of it, I think it's held back by all the other parts. And when it comes to the gameplay, it was either disappointing and undeveloped or just straight up bad. Like, I think that the stealth and combat here is basically fine. The stealth is okay and reasonably enjoyable when you're actually doing it. I think the combat is mostly functional and works decently well in a couple of the boss fights. But there are so many bad parts of this game, whether it's the backtracking, a lot of these combat scenes, the way that it's chosen gimmicks over actually expanding on its core gameplay, that led to me not enjoying this game. The backtracking in particular just felt like my neck was being I could not believe. I was shocked that the game expected me to do that level of backtracking. That felt like they deliberately made the game slow to a crawl for no reason whatsoever that I could possibly ascertain. I think that this game has stuff going for it, but when I'm honestly looking at myself and asking, did I enjoy this and would I recommend it? The answer is no. I think this game is better than like Hitman 1. I think that the fundamentals here are like better than that game, but I would rank this game like below Hitman 2 Stealth Assassin. I'd rank this game below Thief, absolutely below Splinter Cell. And honestly, to be completely honest, I would rank this game below Sly Cooper, a game that I also didn't recommend. So yeah, I was very disappointed, and I just don't think that the good plot and okay stealth gameplay holds up enough for it to be enjoyable to play today. It's making me wonder if Metal Gear Solid 3 is as good as I think it is, and I think that game probably is still very good, but it's got me questioning myself because I just kind of bounced off this game in a way I wasn't expecting. So yeah, for me, James, one of gaming's sacred cows, Metal Gear Solid, I didn't really enjoy it on the whole, and I wouldn't recommend it.
Interesting. You're a lot lower than I thought you were going to be. For me, I really love this game, and I always have, and I probably always will. I did notice this on this playthrough that, the latter half of the game is significantly worse than the start. But playing on hard, I found the stealth gameplay to be really, really enjoyable. To use Patrick's analogy, I definitely rated above Hitman 1, and also like Hitman 2, and probably Thief 1 as well.
Whoa,
Um,
okay,
yeah, I
crazy.
think yeah, I think Thief One's gameplay is worse than this, even though there's not much of it here.
Oh my
But
god.
you know, different way of playing the game, I guess.
Yeah, that to me is crazy. Like to me, Thief One's fundamental gameplay is like so much stronger and more interesting than this game. Like it's miles ahead of it.
Because basically, like that game, you have perfect information all the time. Like you just look around the corner. I found the like gathering information part of not having the camera to be really, really engaging,
Okay.
which puts it ahead of that for me by quite a bit. I also just like really like the story and the characters in this game, and I
Hmm.
love the voice acting to bits. Like, there is a reason this game gets memed to hell and back with like voice clips. Like, it's just so good. Like the absolute schlock of the plot in the opening hours is just like 10 out of 10, and I love it dearly. I do think all of the boss fights are really good. It's just the backtracking and the tower bit that I like absolutely loathe. With basically everything else, I find enjoyable.
We
So
wow. Okay. Yeah, like you enjoyed the sniper wolf fight. Like to me, it's just
yeah,
so brainless. You just lie in place and are moving your trigger left and right slightly. Like it's just insubstantial. That's how I describe a lot of this game. Insubstantial. You know, the rappelling down the wall is just kind of it's like a
yeah,
mini game.
Yeah,
Like,
that bit it's like a 2 minute section though.
yeah, I guess I would argue that there are a lot of sections like that throughout the game. You know, like the bit where you're shooting the rocket to destroy the electrical box. Like it's
That
not
bit's fine. I
bad.
like that.
Yeah, it's not bad, but I mean, there's nothing particularly compelling about it either. Is what I'm getting at. I think the main difference between you and I is you seem to really enjoy the stealth bits, and maybe if I had enjoyed the stealth bits as much as you, would tip over to recommend. But yeah, I just didn't really feel there was much here for me to sink my hooks into, basically.
Yeah, and I also think that just in general, I value novelty a lot more than you do. So, like these sections, like the missile, stuff like that, I find quite enjoyable.
Okay.
Even like stuff like having to use the cigarette or the thermals for the lasers, like I find that inherently enjoyable.
Hmm.
Finding the explosive walls in that room, how like the boss fights are all quite varied. Like Ocelot versus like Vulcan Raven versus fighting liquid on the top of, with your fists is they're also, fundamentally different to one another. And like the game throws these completely different sections after you, one after the other. And it really does not like reuse things other than those awful backtracking sections. And I really value that kind of like tightness. Like there is a lot of unique gameplay here. So
Yeah, see, it's so weird because that to me is what's wrong with the game. It chooses to do unique gimmicks over actually developing its gameplay in a more significant way that I can really get my teeth into. That's why I don't like this game as much, because
yeah,
it's throwing insubstantial novelty at me over and over again. I wanted something meatier and it never gave it to me.
yeah, and I think that's going to come down to what kind of player you are, right? Like, I've basically always liked that about this game.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, interesting.
so I do recommend Metal Gear Solid One, but clearly, if your main drive to play this game is because you want lots of intense stealth action, you're going to be disappointed. This is a novelty machine through and through.
Well, if we do two, I'm certainly not playing with Radar again.
Yeah, I think that was probably a mistake.
I think a mistake is a bit too far.
I was
Pulling when
surprised
I've
when you said you were playing on normal. I was like, you've played a lot of stealth games.
yeah, I just haven't played a stealth game like this before. I guess like Metal Gear Solid 3 doesn't have a radar, but it's designed that way. So I thought that the stealth would be harder. I mean, I don't think that was an unreasonable thing to suspect. I mean, Thief is certainly a difficult stealth game, and that's the first in its series.
Yeah,
I wonder what the original
it's
Metal Gears are
also
like.
like an action game though.
That's true. Although probably best not to do the sword fighting. Did
Yeah,
have you played the original Metal Gear games at all?
I have not. No.
Kind of interested
Um,
to see what they're like now.
maybe. I mean, that'd be probably interesting episodes to.
Yeah, probably not as good as I feel as I think.
Well, I don't have no opinion. I guess people
yeah,
always talk about Metal Gear Solid One. I feel like I never see discussion for the original games.
I'll have to do some reading.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you everyone so much for listening to us talk about Metal Gear Solid and my very hot, spicy takes, and James's far more reasonable ones. We are the Retrospectives podcast. You can find all of our content on our website, which is rspodcast.net. It's got links to every single one of our 110 episodes, a bunch of articles that James and I have written, and links to our social media, the most important of which is our Discord server. Our Discord server is where we interact with our community, and it's also where we take game recommendations. So if you want to give us any feedback, or if you have a game that you'd like to see us play, please swing by our Discord server. There'll be a link in the show notes, and you can let us know what you think. Finally, we also have a Buy Me a Coffee page. If you'd like to support us monetarily, we'll also put a link to the show notes below. So, James, Metal Gear Solid done, another stealth game scratched off our master list. What's on the agenda for next fortnight?
Yeah, so I actually want to return to a more PC-like genre. This is a rare thing for me. I normally always like my console games, but I've been feeling for a while now that we haven't done enough like sim sort of games, like nothing, since we did Empire Rise of the Middle Kingdom, I've had like a huge itch for another game, maybe of that style. So I was having a look, and there's not a whole lot of like super popular titles that I was interested, other than Roller Coaster Tycoon 2, which a number of my friends love to bits, and I remember playing a demo of when I was a kid. But this is a game that I haven't really sunk my teeth into a lot. But I've been looking for a sim-like game and really actually kind of keen to get building. Honestly, I'm more excited for the like Animal Crossing style aspect of it, where it's more about making something cool and being proud of what you made rather than the actual like missions or whatever. So I think that'll be kind of like a first for us on the show.
I played Roller Coaster Tycoon a lot, so this is one I'm coming into with a lot of experience. So it should be interesting to see our contrasting perspectives, because this is one which I know pretty damn well.
Oh, really? Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, I've but this was one of the games on my PC as a kid growing up, so I played it a lot, played most of the missions, had a lot of successful parks. I didn't do a whole lot of building my own roller coasters, but I did a lot of the park management stuff. So
Mm.
I'll see how I go this time round. Although I'm kind of a little worried that I'm going to find it a bit a bit too unexciting. These lifestyle games have never been my cup of tea exactly.
Yeah,
So, but I'm willing to give it a go and see how I feel. And maybe the passage of time has made me.
interesting. I know it's quite a long game, so we'll probably have to do what we did for Rise the Middle Kingdom and Heroes of Might and Magic 3, where we don't get to play the entire game, just quite a substantial amount of it.
That's fine. You just do 10 to 15 scenarios, and you
It's
know
the
what the
same
game
thing every
is.
time, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I'll be looking forward to that, and we'll have to figure out which version is the best to play these days.
But we'll post that all shortly.
So thanks for everyone listening to our contrasting opinions on Metal Gear Solid 1, and we'll see you next time.
Adios, everyone. Bye.